Welcome back. Again, I haven't done much in our application, have we? I've mostly reviewed all the big pieces of it and the layouts and the build files and the manifest and how the Java code looks and everything. It certainly feels like it takes an awfully long time and an awful lot of work to do nothing. But nevertheless, we're building up the machinery that we can then assume going forward. Now, in order to run my application, I need to run on an emulator. Later, I'll run on a connected device, but right now I want to start with that. The link at the top here, called the Avd Manager, manages the emulators. Avd, again, stands for Android Virtual Device. I will click on that link, and it will bring up a little window showing all the devices that I've already created. Now, I've been creating these for a while here. You can see they have various names and API levels, 18, 21, 22, x86, all these different pieces here, so that I can test out my application under a variety of different API levels and devices. Now, when you first start up, you may not have any, or you may have one, depending on what the SDK has given you by default. In order to make one, you click the little Create Virtual Device button at the bottom, and then I'll just show you the process, although I'm not going to make a new one at the moment. There's a category, phone and tablet and wear and TV that you can use to select whichever one you like. I'll stick with phone again. The names sound like they represent actual devices, and they are an attempt to give you the same screen resolution and density and measurements as the devices, but they're not necessarily using the same system as those devices use within the bounds of the SDK. I mean, it is trying to show the same SDK, but those devices may have specialized features on there that wouldn't come up here. If I said, okay, I'd like to make a Nexus 6 device, say, then I would click Next, and there's my MNC variations at the top. Here are all the different Lollipop versions, and then you see Kit Kat, or Jelly Bean, or Ice Cream Sandwich, or Honeycomb. Kind of glad that went away. I don't like the icon there. Gingerbread, and Froyo, all the way back. I'm going to pick, let's see, how about a Lollipop device on API level 22, say. And then the other issue is this ABI, basically what chip is this device running on. Now, by default, you'll have an ARM device. The ARM chip is the closest simulation to what you actually will be using in practice. The problem is from an emulator point of view, it is extremely slow. So one of the things that we do when we're working on Android is that we install this extra feature known as the Intel Hardware Acceleration Module, HAXM, and that allows you to use what is called an x86 or an x86_64-bit emulation in your emulator, and that is much, much faster than the original. So all the emulators I'm using will be x86 or x86-64, even better, in order to speed them up. So I'll use that at the moment. One of the new features of the Android Studio IDE that's coming, that may have been installed by the time you see this video, is they're going to install that HAXM part automatically. Right now you need to install it through the SDK Manager and by double-clicking an executable. But for the moment, we can just go with what I have here. So I'm going to click Next, and then it would show that this is your opportunity to put in a name here, and the dimensions of it, the dots per inch and everything, which operating system we're using, the startup size and orientation, emulator performance. The checkbox here says use the host GPU, that's the graphics processor, so that I would be using the graphics accelerator on my laptop as opposed to using the one on the emulator. Another option here is to store a snapshot for faster startup. If you do that, then every time you shut down the emulator, it will save its current state so that when you restart it, it will start from that state. The only problem is that it'll save it every single time and those start to accumulate. If I look at the advanced settings, then they add the possibility of seeing a front or back camera, which can either be none or emulated or even a webcam. Use the one off of your host device, in this case my laptop. You can play around with network speed. You can also adjust the RAM or internal storage, or whether we have an SD card and how big it is, and even custom skin definitions if you need to do that. And finally, this one, whether you are enabling keyboard input from the host operating system, from my laptop, or whether you're going to get the soft keyboard every time you start up the emulator. I am allowing for keyboard input from my laptop. I clicked on that so that you'd see over here the documentation says enables you to enter text input and interact with the AVD with your hardware computer keyboard instead of the on screen. So obviously there's some bugs in the system. But the idea is we don't want to necessarily use the soft keyboard on the emulator, which is really awkward to use. Well, I'll use the one from my laptop. What the heck, I will click finish after all, just so that I can see this one show up in my list here, and there we go. Now my Nexus 6 is available here. And what the heck, I think I'll even start it. I did use the x86-64, so it should start up as quickly as these things ever start up, which is not incredibly fast, but fast enough. There are alternative emulators available on the commercial marketplace. I frequently use a free version of one called Genymotion. I'll show you that later. And here, brought up the emulator window, and we'll see how quickly that starts. Now I can get rid of this Avd Manager now. Let me bring back the emulator I was just looking at. And it is currently starting up. And this is actually a fairly realistic illustration of how long it takes the HAX-M version of the emulators to start. By the way, while that's starting, you can see down here, it says HAX is working and emulator runs in fast virtual mode. That lets you know that it is running with that HAX capability in it. Now, this gets faster over time. That took probably about a minute to get started. In general, it will be quicker than that. Certainly now that I've started it, I'll be able to use it routinely. Let me move that to another window so that it's out of the way. And then I will come back here and say it is finally time at long last to run our application. There's a little play button up here that says Run App, or Control R is the shortcut for me. If I click on that, or click Control R, then the Gradle build starts. Down here it says Gradle build is running, and it's executing all the different pieces. Again, this is slower the first time than all the subsequent opportunities. The build found my running device, my emulator. I could launch something else if I want. I could also say use the same device for future launches. I'm just going to go with the emulator as it stands and say OK. And then down at the bottom it says it's uploading something called an APK. That's the Android package version of the application, already dexified and everything. Now let me go to the emulator, and there it is. It simply says Hello World. Although I don't seem to have a title or anything else, because when they used that compatibility library, they did not in fact give us a theme with an action bar in it, even though they said they were going to. In the next section, I want to fix that and start talking about themes and then adding widgets onto that and start making something that has a little bit more power to it. But at least now I've got an emulator running. I can actually execute my application, and the process does appear to be working. So in the next section, we'll go on from there.